Welcome back to Movie On. Today we're going to do a recap of the movie named A Dangerous Method from 2011. The movie essays the 1904 era. It opens with the scene of a carriage attached with two black horses making its way towards a remote and isolated area. Inside the buggy can be seen a woman who's hysterically screaming and shouting as her servants try to tame her. That young woman goes by the name Sabina Spielrein, who's a Russian Jew. Sabina had been diagnosed with early stages of hysteria. It turns out that Sabina had been sent by her parents to a mental hospital where she can be treated for her illness. The young woman arrives at the Bergholzli, the preeminent psychiatric hospital in Zurich, Switzerland. Sabrina's condition has gotten so worse that she's being pulled outside from the carriage since she refuses to come out on her own. Two men who appear to be her servants grab her from her legs and arms and carry her inside as the maids open doors for them. Sabrina is now seen having her first interaction with her doctor, as she finally agrees to sit and not run away. Panicking and trembling, Sabina sits while mumbling and sees a young doctor marching in. That young doctor introduces himself as Carl Jung and comforts her right away by telling her that he will just come to see her on a daily basis for 2 to 3 hours every day, just to talk to her. Carl begins a new course of treatment with the young Sabina. He's using word association and dream interpretation as part of his approach to Sigmund Freud's radical new science of psychoanalysis. The approach requires open talking about fears or trigger assortments. Carl believes on the approach that one can reach the root cause of mental illness by talking things out. That way, illness can be eliminated or treated faster. Carl even comes home from his first session with Sabina and tells his beautiful wife Emma on the dinner table that he would practically be the first one to try this method. Emma is pregnant at the moment and is being taken well care of. Emma is backed by her wealthy parents and affords a luxurious lifestyle. Psychoanalysts in that era had not approached the exchange of thoughts and dream interpretation method yet. They were focused on and believed that a person's illness merges due to sexual dissatisfaction or lack of freedom in sexuality. The analysts of that era would simply please their patients with open sexual acts or would try some other methods that certainly revolved around sex. In the first session, Carl places a chair behind Sabina's chair and starts asking her questions, starting from basic ones according to the approach. He leads to the point where Sabina reveals to him that her condition was triggered by the humiliation and sexual arousal she felt as a child due to her short-tempered father's habit of spanking her naked. Sabina has trouble speaking and suffers from many spasms that lock her lower jaw while talking. As she trembles and stutters, she tells Carl that she was 4 years old when her father first assaulted her for breaking a dish plate. Her father had spanked the 4-year-old girl in a locked room with her clothes stripped down. Carl takes Sabina for a walk outside. She confesses that her parents hate each other, but pretend to be okay in front of her. Carl surprisingly asks her how she knows. She replies that these conflicting feelings are told to her in her head by an angel who speaks German. Her feelings were compounded by her instinctive knowledge. She tells Carl that the voice inside her head also tells her that she has done nothing to deserve such a punishment, and in fact that she may have been a stand-in for her mother in her father's abuse, since her mother was unfaithful. She also tells Carl that she was really bothered as her affluent Russian Jewish family afforded her an exceptional education in preparation for university study, although not on the subject of sex, and she was a virgin. Carl begs his pardon before telling her that despite just being started, he has to leave the place for a couple of weeks to provide some military services. Losing temper, Sabina bursts out and shouts she'll never be a doctor because of her parents. She throws her coat on the muddy ground. Carl quickly picks it up and tries to ward off the dust by using his cane. As he hits the coat with his cane, Sabina starts screaming and places her hands on her ears, suggesting that her fretfulness had been triggered with the act. He takes her back to the hospital and leaves for the military unhappily. Sabina, meanwhile, is seen playing with her food instead of eating. The maid takes notice and goes to get the head of the hospital, Eugen Bleuler. As they make a return, they find the room empty. Sabina escapes the room and ends up jumping in the dirty pond outside the hospital. Mr. Eugen happens to make a small conversation with the hysterical woman and finds a spark of intelligence inside her. He tells her to share her interests, so he gets Carl Jung to manage some activities for her. At last, he asks the staff to get her out of the mess and clean her. Maids hardly manage to get her out since she scratches and bites their hands. They take her inside and throw her in the tub and scrub her whole dirty and muddy body as she freaks them out by screaming and laughing at the same time. Carl makes his return and finds out that his wife had given birth to a girl. Carl is seen excited and happy on the birth of their first offspring, where Emma is saddened and feels she has disappointed Carl by not giving birth to a boy. Subsequently, he makes a visit to the hospital for work, where he gets into a conversation with Mr. Eugen and asks him about Sabrina's interests. They come to the conclusion, since she plans to study medicine once she's treated, of letting her assist them in their experiments, including measuring the physical reactions of subjects during word association, to provide empirical data as a scientific basis for psychoanalysis and ameliorate the more sensational aspects of Freud's theories, which contend that all mental illness is rooted in childhood sexual experience, be it real or fantasy. Her intelligence and energy were immediately recognized and encouraged by Jung and Eugen Bleuler. She soon learns that much of this new science is founded on the doctor's observations of themselves, each other, and their families, not just their patients. The doctors correspond at length before they meet, and begin sharing their dreams and analyzing each other, and Freud adopts Jung as his heir and agent. Sabina assists Carl as he runs a test on his pregnant wife, Emma. He tests her ability to respond by asking her to come up with a word when he tells her a certain other word. He sets a stopwatch to her answers to check how many seconds it takes for Emma to respond to a certain word. Meanwhile, Sabina helps him measure Emma's pulse rate. After Emma leaves, Sabina makes some good observations regarding Emma's behavior and responds back to Carl. She exchanges her thoughts about Emma's way of behaving when she was asked the words family, sex, divorce. Sabina makes some good points that surprise Carl Jung. Carl often reveals to his wife that he wishes to meet his ideal inspiration, Sigmund Freud. He believes and follows his theories and finds him as a fatherly figure. Emma encourages him to write a letter, but he decides to meet him in person. Carl starts conversing on the dinner table as Sigmund's family gets awkward. They decide to go to his study, where they sit down for an intellectual conversation and share their exquisite knowledge. Sigmund lights up his cigar while Carl smokes his corncob pipe. Based on their enthusiasm, they develop a friendship driven by their lengthy philosophical discussions on psychoanalysis. He debates with Sigmund while exchanging their thoughts on Sabina's case. Freud tells him to imply the sexual anal method on her, which he disagrees to. Carl discusses with the man that he is desperately in search of a method that does not seek sexual treatment. He asks him if there must be some other way of finding things out. Carl is highly intrigued by Freud for being so convincing, but however he does not feel like opting for a sexual act. As time passes by, Jung finds Sabina a kindred spirit with a unique perspective as her self-awareness sharpens, and their attraction deepens in what was already well known at the time as transference. Jung's resistance to the idea of infidelity and breaking the taboo of sex with a patient is undercut by the wild and unrepentant confidences of another brilliant, philandering, unstable psychoanalyst who comes under his care, Otto Gross. He decries monogamy in general and suggests that resistance to transference is symptomatic of the repression of normal, healthy sexual impulses, exhorting Carl Jung to indulge himself with abandon. He gives one of the maids from the hospital he's currently admitted in a sexual favor to get himself a ladder. He climbs the ladder and jumps off the wall and escapes. Carl, who has become deeply convinced by Otto's perception, was already aware of his escape, as he asks him to tell Eugen that he has died. Later, Otto actually dies of hunger when his body gets discovered in the streets. Since Sabina has been under the treatment for almost 2 years, she has gained much more hold and control over her reactions and body movements and aggression issues. Sabina has even started her university. She's not happy by the idea that her subjects are totally grounded from sex education, which is quite the opposite of what she wanted. But she's learning to compromise and not react drastically. Sabina still makes sessions with Carl, but Carl feels comfortable exchanging his thoughts as well, since she's progressing. Carl, who is already moved and affected by Otto's perception towards sexual approaches and his experiences, he decides to converse with Sabina and ask for an opinion. They meet by the seashore. The two sit on a bench when Sabina asks him to spill his thoughts on Wagner's opera. Wagner's opera suggests that perfection can be only arrived at through what is conventionally thought of as a sin. She asks Carl if it's right and shares her opinion by saying, "This must surely have to do with the energy created by the friction of the opposites." She also adds, "Only the crash of destructive forces can create something new." To prove her point, she tells Carl that she was ill and her root cause was sexual, which she did not know. She tells him that a part of her brain is finally acknowledging that she does not have any sexual experience, and nor was she aware of it, which was causing her to be hysterical. She was too young to identify her sexual pleasure that caused her to be mentally frustrated and ill. When she feels like her point is not being delivered to Carl, she simply kisses him. Carl is moved to see a woman initiating the act. They talk for a while. Sabina offers him a chance to make his initiative by pointing at a building saying that she lives here and he's welcome anytime. Fighting with his own thoughts, Carl revisits the hospital room where Sabina was kept in her early hysterical stages. He finds sketches of the naked woman. Carl decides to please Sabina, implying that only the crash of destructive forces can create something new. Late at night, he decides to show up at Sabina's place, where they can have sex, as he's intrigued by the woman himself. He starts kissing Sabina as she opens the door. He picks her up and pushes her against the door. Sabina loses her virginity that night and sees a bloodstain at the back of her gown. Sabina demands to be spanked afterwards. Sabina and Young finally begin their affair, which in the film includes rudimentary bondage and spanking. Things become even more tangled as he becomes her advisor to her dissertation. He publishes not only his studies of her as a patient, but eventually her treatise as well. Her original ideas are rooted not only in her insights into her childhood trauma, but the intensity and conflicts in their relationship. Spielrein's thesis suggests that truly heroic, original creations can only emerge from the crucible of great conflict, such as the attraction of opposites and the breaking of taboos, and thus the instinct for creation is inextricably tied to a drive to destruction, and that these feelings and ideas are not restricted to sexual expression, despite their roots in the biological drive to reproduce. This includes, finally, his refusal to give her a love child, which is the story behind the reference to Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen operas. They see themselves in the legend of Siegfried, the archetypal Teutonic hero born from a forbidden union. After his attempt to confine their relationship again to doctor and patient, she appeals to Freud for his professional help, and forces Jung to tell Freud the truth about their relationship, reminding him that she could have publicly damaged him, but did not want to. Jung and Freud journey to America. However, cracks appear in their friendship as they begin to disagree more frequently on matters of psychoanalysis. Jung and Spielrein meet to work on her dissertation in Switzerland and begin their sexual relationship once more. However, after Jung refuses to leave his wife for her, Spielrein decides to go to Vienna. She meets Freud and expresses that, although she sides with him, she believes he and Jung need to reconcile for psychoanalysis to continue to develop. Following Freud's collapse at an academic conference, Jung and Freud continue correspondence via letters, through which they decide to end their relationship, after increasing hostilities and accusations regarding the differences in their conceptualization of psychoanalysis. Spielrein marries a Russian doctor and, while pregnant, visits Jung and his wife. They discuss psychoanalysis and Jung's new mistress. Jung confides that his love for Spielrein made him a better person. The final on-screen text reveals that Otto Gross starved to death in Berlin in 1919, that Freud died of cancer in London in 1939 after being driven out of Vienna by the Nazis, that Spielrein trained a number of analysts in the new Soviet Union before she, along with her 2 daughters, was shot by Nazis in 1942, and that Jung emerged from a nervous breakdown to become the world's leading psychologist before dying peacefully in 1961. To watch more recaps of these kinds of movies, click on the thumbnails on your screen. And don't forget to share your thoughts about today's video in the comments section. Kindly like the video and subscribe to my channel, and press the bell icon so you don't miss any new videos. And at last, I will say, stay safe, stay well, see you next time, and thanks for watching.